Good evening. No one has appeared tonight, and I've not had any response from any of you who are on this course. I'm going to be contacting you individually over the next few days to find out how you want these to be delivered. In the meantime, last week's session was recorded and is available on the Moodle should you wish to access that at any time that was suitable to you. But please let me know if you want to access these, because I'll now record this second session in the hope that you'll pick this up as well. We may do things differently as we progress if I get some feedback from you as to what you would like. Last week we looked at the course brief for both units and how, we looked at some of the notes on Unit 1, and we looked at the key concepts or the principles of assessment. One of the first parts of your workbook will be assessment planning. So what I want to do this evening is look at PowerPoint 2, which is on here, PowerPoint 2. Planning assessment. One of the things that is most important when assessing any work is to make sure you plan to do it, and the people involved know that it's going to occur, mainly the learner, but there may be other people involved if the learner is being observed or another means of assessment is being used in the workplace. A supervisor and need to know, make arrangements to be there at the time, what's going to be assessed and what's going to be looked at, how it's going to be assessed. It means the process of assessment, whether it's going to be observed or whether it's going to be some other means, and the resources that may be needed during that process. Minimising risks. This is not specifically about health and safety. It's making sure that the learner is equipped to do the assessment and is ready for it. Make sure that all the resources that will be involved are available, and it mainly involving and supported the learner during this process, involving any others or activities and resources that may be needed. It may be some form of technology that's needed. Equality and diversity, that depends on the process, whether it's one-to-one or whether there are a number of people involved. At the end of an assessment, there'll be an action plan for further work or further assessment processes when they need to take place. At the end of this, there'll be a summary quiz and a reading list and a website list of what you need to know. So, all the W's and H. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. So it's who will be assessed, that is your learner. What will be assessed? Are there a unit? If it could be any of the academic processes that we use. If it's any of those that are being assessed, it can be the work that's been presented. It can be an observation of a presentation or something of that nature. But if it could be work that's being assessed in the workplace to a particular standard or for a part of a qualification. That will involve something called holistic assessment, which I'll come to later. When, and the when's important so that everything can be arranged and make sure it's everybody who is involved is arranged to be there and available when it will happen. Where it's going to be assessed, why it will be assessed, and how it will be assessed. How being the method, and why does it need to be assessed? Right, it mentions holistic assessment. This is assessing several parts at the same time. Can self or peer assessment be used? To a certain extent, that is true, because certainly in my experience of MVQ type assessment, it's no good assessing any of the learners until they know they're ready, until they tell you as the assessor, I'm ready to be assessed on that now, and you'll make the arrangements to do the assessment. Now that may mean that it is a job of work that's going to be done. It could be something in construction, engineering, or even retail, dealing with customers, that sort of thing, that may be observed, or maybe with accessories and so forth. But what you will look at is the whole job that they do. I'll use a retail example. If a learner is dealing with a customer, the customer comes in, they go to help the customer make a choice. The customer then makes the choice, takes the whatever it is they bought to the till, pays for it, change is given, and maybe the item is wrapped or put in a bag for them, and then they leave the premises. Now, handling money, dealing with customers or helping customers may be in two totally different units. They may not be in, or I know that they're not in the same unit as it happens, but you can assess what they've done as part of the elements for that unit, and that is looking at holistic evidence. So you've looked at a job of work and see which units and elements have fallen out of that job. And those are the ones that can be signed off, or if they've been done correctly and it's passed. And usually if you, as the assessor, work with the learner so that they will tell you, I'm ready to be assessed on that, then usually it's not a problem. It also identifies future work, things that need to be done. It may be that that job has been done a couple of times, but differently, and different aspects of it were covered each time. It may be that there is an area still outstanding that's not been covered that you need to look at again, or find some other means of developing the evidence to show that they are capable or competent to do that. Do you need, in terms of academic work, do you need to create assignments or prepare questions? Or are the materials already provided with you? A lot of us will use awarding body material that's been provided, but in some instances that may not be available, so you would have to design or create an assignment that will meet the criteria that's being demanded. Learners' prior knowledge and experience. How do you know what they already know and can do? Usually, if they've been on some form of training program or achieved a certain qualification, you can look earlier at the initial assessment and diagnostics to find out what's been achieved already and where they can go from here. Oops, wrong page. Aspect to consider when planning. Health and safety, the learner's welfare. That's, again, part of it. If you're in a workshop background, obviously there will be serious health and safety considerations to be looked at. Many operations, or most operations, will have a risk assessment system in place, and those will have been done for the operation that's going to be carried out, or for the observation, or whatever it is that's going to take place to assess the capability of the learner. For academic work, there's a possibility of plagiarism or collusion with other students, cheating and copying. This is mainly taking place, we use, as many of you know, we use something called PlagScan, which basically puts the work through a plagiarism scan, and provided it comes out certainly under 10%, then there's not an issue with that. It may be that certain references have been made that have not been accredited, and it just may need tidying up. Over or under assessing learners. Under assessing, I would put at doing summative assessment rather than formative assessment, which is ongoing. And this is what I tend to use, and I would hope that most of you will do the same thing, certainly on academic work, where students or learners can send in work they've already done and say, look, is this meeting the criteria? Am I going in the right direction? How does this look? And then you can actually make a statement on that or give some feedback on that for them to continue. So under assessing is not assessing enough really to give them the direction they need to move to the next stage. And again, using the right types and methods at the right time. Some of the academic work, you're really tied to a certain extent as to the different methods you can assess. I've mentioned a couple, which is observation. Obviously, if a presentation is done, be it online or in the flesh, so to speak, that can be observed, and that can be an observation and recorded. At some point, most of the people on the program will have some formal observation, so that it can be an observation by your IQA of the people you're assessing, observing you doing the assessment. It can be observing you giving feedback to learners, basically gathering hard information. So using the right types and methods. Also, it can be questions. What we've developed is a series of workbooks, a workbook with a series of questions on it that are aimed particularly at the assessment criteria of each of the learning objectives. Once you've completed those to the level required, then basically the knowledge part of it will be covered. Some of the things you will be asked to develop during that period, so that's assessment plans you will have to make, documentary evidence that you can put together, will almost fulfill completely Unit 3, which we will move on to after this unit. Sometimes language can be a barrier, and you may have to make specific arrangements with certain learners to make sure that language does not become a barrier. What to consider when planning? How can you minimise any potential risks? It should involve a discussion between you and the learner with the chance to set realistic dates and targets. And again, this comes back to my mentioning that the learner should be dictating when they are ready for assessment. If it be a practical observation, then they can tell you when they're ready to do that. If it's academic work, it can be sent in to you to look at and give some feedback on to point them in the right direction. Conversation can lead to issues that need to be discussed and resolved. Other things like transport, access, communication, particular learner needs, language bilingualism, physical disabilities, lack of information, shift patterns, etc. One of the problem, well, it wasn't a problem because we had to do it, but as an external assessor for a number of colleges in the engineering sector, a number of my learners were on night shift. And I can remember to this day distinctly going in at 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning to do observations on a number of trainees that were on that shift. It was the only way around the situation. So these things need to be discussed, obviously, and resolved. Within your own organisation that you're working with or for, who is involved? You've got other assessors that you may be helping you. It may be the internal quality assurers and support staff in that environment. One of the units that one of my group on doing DET level 5 have got to be on quality assurance, and she is in the process now of contacting their quality assurance team to get to understand the documentary work that they have to do to gather evidence of quality within their environment. And once that's been done. She can then talk about that in the script that she's going to write for me. So again, information is available to a lot of people. They've only got to ask and find out in their own establishment who does what and what information they can help you with. Awarding organisation staff, external quality assurers. Most of the time they will come in from time to time to look at work that has been assessed by our college, for instance. They've been IQA'd by qualified IQA, and then a number of learners' work will be put forward to the external quality assurer, who will come in and look at those and make judgment on them, and then obviously certification will follow, provided there are no issues. Also, they will do, at the end of the visit, they will do a report, and on that report there may be, hopefully not, but there will be maybe some actions to complete for future reference. So getting information back from there, if you're in an establishment and you've had a visit from an external quality assurer, their report may say no actions, which is great. If there are actions, then the IQA within that establishment should be talking to the assessors to say what's been, or delivering the information that's come back from the awarding body. Witnesses, other people that the learner is in contact with who could give a statement as to their competence, e.g. a supervisor at work. Now that is okay as far as it goes. The supervisor may be great. There may be other tradesmen that the learner is working with that are competent at the job, but do they know the standards? Are they aware of what's trying to be achieved? It's sometimes too easy to say, oh, well, he can do the job, so he's a good witness. They need to have some idea of what is being produced or what evidence is required, so that they can give a correct witness statement. Who should you liaise with regarding assessment processes and why? Well, that's a fairly easy one. Assessment activities may be provided, e.g. assignments, observation, checklists, oral questions, etc. If not, you may need to produce your own based on the requirements of what is to be assessed. That involves the assessor then making a decision in his view or her view of what the criteria are actually asking for, and will that, or will what you have produced fulfill that, or won't it? So you've got to be careful when you produce any work yourself to make sure it meets with the awarding body standards. If you're not sure, ask your own IQA, and if he's not sure, he can go back to the awarding body and say, will that meet the requirements? Any resources that support assessment can include smartphones, digital recorders, cameras, etc. Quite often, certainly in the construction trade, pictures are taken on a regular basis. Because of the situation, it may be that that's the only way you can gather the evidence. But if pictures are taken, it's no good just showing a photograph and saying, yeah, that's me there. It needs to say who is who on the picture, what is being actually done on the picture, and it needs to be annotated to show that, to make it a valid piece of evidence. Otherwise, it's just a picture. Right. Question. List at least 2 activities and 2 resources you could use when assessing newer learners, along with the advantages and limitations of each. Well, that's a quick question along here. So if you're assessing a piece of work, then you may need, obviously you're going to need a laptop or a computer to be able to access the work that the student has given to you, or the learner has given to you, and then make your judgment of that. But again, that's got limitations in terms of, has the learner actually produced that work, or is it somebody else? But it is advantageous because as the assessor, you will learn to read what they have written, and I can tell if any of the work on my students or learners is not theirs. The language that they use changes considerably, and you know immediately there's an issue there that you need to bring in. Yeah, technology is constantly evolving. New resources are frequently becoming available. It's crucial to keep up to date with new developments, and you should try to incorporate these. One of the things that is most useful is video, and also platforms like this one, like Join Me, where you can actually set up to do on Join Me to present a presentation to your students in a particular environment. I can be contacted to join into that presentation, so I can watch it on here and do an observation of you purely putting that together. And that is an excellent piece of evidence, or an excellent way of using technology. A lot of the learners will use technology to complete their assessment activities. A lot of work now is done, as far as the research is concerned, online, so that information with regard to the study detail is given. We supply much evidence on the Moodle platform for them to get at. Some of that is actually links to URLs that they can get information from, and also do some of their own research on the net on a particular subject to bring in answers or responses to a particular piece of work. We've got two technologies. Yeah, it's saying some of the things I've just said, which is digital media, audio, visual, and playback, electronic portfolios for learners to store their work. I'm going to do a piece on that, because I was discussing this afternoon, and we're going to look at putting a electronic portfolio model together to look at. If you're in a classroom, of course, the new interactive whiteboards for learners to use for presentations in the display their work is good, but there's nothing wrong with the old-fashioned videoing of the learner delivering, actually using the whatever resources they've got together to do that. Mobile phones for taking pictures and video clips, they are particularly useful in areas where, like I've said, if they're working on site or away from a particular, a decent environment in which to communicate. Webcams, video conferencing, this is the type of thing I've just discussed about using Join Me. So you can place your learners you need to observe, if they need to observe a particular task. Yeah, equality is about the rights of learners who have access to attend and participate in the children's learning experience. In the past, equality has often been described as everyone being the same or having the same opportunities. Nowadays, it can be often described as everyone being different but having equal rights. It's a moot point, really. Everyone is different. No two people are the same. But on the programme, provided you have the same opportunities, is that the same as having equal rights? I'd say not quite. Having the same opportunities is the important bit, and that is things like access to your assessor, access to materials and resources that can help you through the programme. Yeah, diversity about valuing and respecting differences in people regardless of ability or circumstances or any other individual characteristic they may have. If you have two or more learners, you will experience diversity. Learners are entitled to be treated with respect, with their differences acknowledged and taken into consideration. Sometimes you will have a group of learners and you may have to split them into two groups because one group is moving too far ahead of the others, and to put them all in the same group would be unfair. So you move the faster group into a separate group, and the slow ones allow them to move along at their own pace without feeling pressure. So it's action plans and assessment plans. Two different things. The assessment planner is to plan the assessment and the work involved in confirming and then completing that assessment or that assessment series or process. The action plan is something that will come out of that. Yeah, it's an action plan, things that need to be done. This is fairly straightforward with practical or vocational work, where a list of things need to be completed, things that were not done can easily be identified, things that were done and done well can be identified fairly easily, and the action plan is relatively straightforward. With academic work, it's slightly different, because if, for instance, an assignment has been put together, then it is easier, because the students will be working towards that assignment rather than just the bare learning objectives. They will be directed onto there, and the way they then produce the evidence will be similar. It will be different to each student's learner's circumstances, but it will be meeting the criteria, or it won't be meeting the criteria, and the operation of formative assessment is to direct or redirect that work. An assessment plan takes place some of these aspects and breaks them down into the specific WWH. Can also be used to review any document progress. There's a number of books on here, some of which are on the Moodle, some of which will be on the net, and there are some handouts as well on this to cover other sections of there as well. So that's a reading list for you, and there's also a website list as well. Assessment resources, Excellence Gateway, Human Rights Commission for Equality and Human Rights, Essentials on Assessing Peer, and Plagiarism Advice on how to avoid it. So, some questions for you. What does 5 W's and an H stand for? 2 of the factors you need to consider when planning assessment. Can you state 2 risks to consider when assessing? Give 1 example of who else besides you and your learner might be involved in the assessment process. State 2 ways of incorporating technology during assessment. It's not too difficult, and I think you can all manage that very easily. Right, I'm going to just shut this one down for now. Oops, go back from there. There we are at last. I'm going to work through to the workbook tasks. The workbook is split into a number of different tasks. Last week, I asked you to complete the first one, sorry, the first 3, I think it was. Oh, well done. Which is Unit 1, Task 8, the training cycle. In the correct order, identify the 5 stages of the training cycle. For each of the 5 stages, explain what is involved. 2, please explain formative and summative assessment how they are used in the 5 stages of the training cycle. Make sure you include definitions for both formative and summative, and remember not to include any bullet points in your responses. None of these can be explained by bullet points. When it's asking these questions at this level, it means that you need to fulfill everything that you need to in there and fully discuss them and explain what they are. Just don't mention them. You'll be asked for examples and so forth. So that was the first one. We'll close that down. And we'll look at this one. Task 3 is adapting assessment methods. Below are some of the scenarios that detail learners with individual needs. You will need to identify these needs and suggest changes that you could make to assessment in order to include this learner. Please consider the following each scenario: presenting in a different format, translations, recorded discussion, extra time, digital recording, use of scribe or reader, and adapted for use with computer or e-assessment, e-portfolio, online submissions or online exam. So scenario 1, you've chosen to set a written exam to assess your learners. However, you are aware that one of your learners has a visual impairment, which makes it very hard for him to read the test paper. In the box below, explain how you can adapt the planned assessment activity to meet the needs of that particular learner. You'll need to research this and make sure that you give a full account of what you would do to do that. Scenario 2 is a core competent for the qualification. It requires a written exam, but you have a learner whose English is a second language. His spoken English or her spoken English is fine. However, the written English is full of spelling mistakes, punctuation errors, making the written work very hard to understand. In the box below, explain how you can adapt the assessment activity to meet the needs of this particular learner. Written work with students whose English is not their first language can be difficult. I have used a variety of interventions, if you like, to cope with this, because what tends to happen is many students whose, as it said, spoken English is fine. They do not write how they speak because they don't put the stops and the new sentences in that they speak. They just write from the first letter to the last one. Lots of ands, very few punctuation marks or any forms of speech, and it can be difficult to read. So it means working with the student to actually get round that process or finding some other means of actually gathering that evidence. So you need to do some research on that and determine what you're going to do. You have decided to set a detailed project assignment that required multiple worksheets and documents to be put together in a folder. At times, it's essential that learners access and use information located on different sheets. You have a learner who is autistic and struggles with organisation and working on many different documents at once. He gets very stressed when asked to use many sheets of paper or asked to put them into any sort of logical order. In the box below, explain how you could adapt and plan the planned assessment activity to meet the needs of the particular learner. So basically, it's giving you 3 different scenarios, and it's asking you to put together responses to that, which are detailed and clear. Constructive feedback. Use the space provided, answer the questions you need in addition to support, use the training video that's located on Moodle as a starting point for some of the process points to explore. Please be aware that these 3 questions contain the explain verb before you should aim to make a specific point. Justify your reasoning, or where possible, give examples to demonstrate you have a detailed understanding. That's just saying what I've already said. These bullet points and quick answers are not a response. You need to detail to show your understanding of this process. So please explain ways you can give constructive feedback to learners. It should include methods and strategies, comparisons between verbal versus and written feedback, and the types of language you should use. Explain key features and characteristics of constructive feedback. What makes feedback constructive? Explain how constructive feedback contributes to the overall assessment process, and make sure you explore the following factors: motivation, confidence, goal setting, and ownership of learning. These books direct you to what you need to do. The detail will require some research for themselves. The resources for that research are on the Moodle platform, and also there is external research that you can do on these areas to give you sufficient information to be able to make a robust response. Just going to close that down again now. Back. Okay. Assessment plan templates, assessment for learning, designing lessons for diversity, effective professional discussion, examples of observation and documents, observation record template, professional discussion record, reflective practice for assessors, reflective teacher. All those are resources that you can read to help you give responses to the questions in the particular tasks that are down there for you to complete. Going back to those tasks, there's also down here, I just wanted to bring that out. We've put these in case you haven't got an assessment planning template. You should have within your organisation, and if so, I stress, use that by all means. That's the one you're used to, that's the one you do, that's the one you use. But this one is a straightforward assessment plan: the learner's name, the course title that they're on, the number of the unit, the learning outcome, and the assessment criteria that are being assessed. Yeah. How the assessment will be taken, what will the learner submit, and the date. And the next one will be Unit 74, Learning Objective 2, and 2.3 and 2.4 assessment criteria. So this one says I will examine an electronic copy produced, also a signed witness statement to validate it. A written description of the process. This I could observe. Alternatively, have a professional discussion where the learner takes me through a hard copy of the document produced using oral questioning. Produce a document which fulfills the criteria. Plan submission date. Yep. Resources required. Company processes and procedures. Any company templates, PC or laptop connected to the company intranet. Learner may scan hard copy disks and store assessment data to electronic portfolio or flash drive. No student news I'm aware of. Working area to be checked before assessment. Any equipment to be cleared away on completion and the area left in a safe condition. The assessment plan will then be agreed, the assessor signs and dates it. I am happy that I know exactly what I'm expected to do to complete this assessment, signed by the learner and the date. And that is a straightforward, simple assessment plan. And that's all it needs to involve. It looks at what's going to be done, by whom and when, and that looks at any other resources that may be needed. Those can be human resources, as I've said before. It may be somebody that needs to work with them on a particular job or whatever. But it's the what's going to be needed at that time, so everybody knows it needs to be available. With that, I'm going to close this evening's meeting. And what I want to do is actually make a start on those. So I would open the workbooks. The PowerPoint presentations are all on there for you to look at and have another glance through if you need more information from those. As I said, the handouts, ebooks and handouts are on here. Any examples that you may need will be on here as well. And I would ask you to look at the first 3 tasks on the workbook. Yeah, the first 3. And if we do them in series of 3, it won't be too much work at any one time. I've actually done these myself, and I know, all right, I'm experienced, but it takes approximately, to give you some idea of content, it will take approximately an hour to complete one of those tasks. And that is working fairly quickly and knowing what you're doing. So if it takes you 2 hours, don't worry about it, because that's probably what it will take you. So that's just giving you an idea of what's involved. So it's not a lot of work, and it makes a start on the assessment process. What I would suggest is, why I'm suggesting 3. Well, there are about 15 altogether. And if we do that over 5 weeks and we complete those 3 each week, after the first couple being, if you'll present those to me, you can send me them by email, by all means, but make sure you've got your name and which unit it is and the qualification actually on your responses, so that I know who I'm dealing with each time, not just relying on your email address. So please, if you make a start on those, I can give you some feedback on there so that you'll know where you're going for the future ones when you start to put the rest of them together. With that, I'll thank you all for listening, I hope, and I will see you again next week, hopefully. Bye now.